You need a balance of altruism and narcissism. You need, ultimately, both. Very commonly today, when people are having challenges with other people, they tend to project the label, boy, they're narcissistic. I've seen this over and over again when people are going through a divorce, particularly when they're surrounded with people that support the person who's in the divorce and maybe even have a lawyer or a psychologist. They tend to project onto the opposite partner, well, they're narcissistic disorder. They're having narcissistic disorder. And yet they were married to those individuals for many, many years in some cases. And they didn't call them a narcissist until all of a sudden they went through a divorce and suddenly they're a narcissist. I'd like to discuss the topic today, narcissism, and its complementary opposite, altruism. And so I hope you take some notes because I think that there'll be some insights on this one. Every human being has moments when they are self-absorbed and other moments when they're other-absorbed. That means they focus on themselves and then they focus on others. And I've seen people who have been labeled narcissists. They've come to my program, the Breakthrough Experience, the people who are labeling people narcissists. And I have them do the Demartini method, which is a method of introspection, to say the least. And then they go and discover that this individual had another side. And when you actually find out they have the other side, you realize that the label that you projected onto them, the narcissist, is not completely who they are. So I want to start off by this statement that no human being is one-sided. And if we are seeing one side, it's because we have a subjective bias and we're not looking carefully to find the other side. And it's our own subjective bias. So beware of the labels. Beware of the facades. Beware of the diagnosis that this is this person or that person. And look at the whole individual. I met this woman with my wife many years ago. And after this meeting, I thought, wow, she's self-absorbed. And my first impression was that way. And then I realized, when I got to know her more, she was head of many philanthropic organizations and was dedicated to many causes. And I realized that she had both sides. But my first impression was one side without the other. So before you put a label on somebody, before you let a psychologist or psychiatrist put a diagnostic label on somebody, look again. Now, I've been looking at hundreds of thousands of people and that have been labeled all kinds of things. And I find that those labels are great for diagnostic purposes in commercial enterprises that want to treat something that may not even be need treated. It may just be a realization of a human being. So I'd like to describe narcissism and altruism, the two poles that we have. And it's a spectrum. And many individuals in the study of psychology have known this. Whenever we are meeting somebody that we infatuate with and we put on a pedestal, and we're too humble to admit what we see in them inside us, and we really admire them, we'll minimize ourselves in comparison. We're too humble to admit what we see in them is inside us, and we'll minimize ourselves. And if you think about it, when you've met somebody that you're highly enamored with, highly admiring, infatuated with, you'll tend to sacrifice what's important to you initially to be in that relationship for fear of loss of them. And you'll go into a self-minimizing, self-depreciating, lower self-esteem positioning relative to them and put them on a pedestal. When you put them on a pedestal and minimize yourself, you'll tend to wake up your altruistic persona. And I say persona, it's a mask you wear when you're not recognizing what you see in them inside yourself. Whenever you do that, you'll tend to minimize yourself for them, fear the loss of them, sacrifice for them, and you'll put on an act that you are altruistic relative to them. Now, at the same time, you might meet somebody else that you look down on and resent deeply and want to avoid, and you're too proud to admit what you see in them is inside you. And now you wake up to them a narcissistic persona, and you go, well, it's my way or the highway. And I think if you look carefully in any relationship long term, you get both of these personas. So anytime you look down on somebody and you're too proud to admit what you see in them is inside you, you tend to put on your narcissistic persona. Anytime you're enamored with them and infatuated with them and too humble to admit what you see in them is inside you, you put on your altruistic persona. So relative to different people, you play out different personas. And I can guarantee I can demonstrate this and show this to people and then show you the same individual playing out the opposite role in front of somebody else. I know an individual who's very, quote, narcissistic, and a lot of people like to label them. But the moment they meet somebody that they are subordinating to and looking up to, I watch them go the other side. And I've also seen people that are really altruistic have their values challenged, look down and resent somebody and play out a narcissistic side. So I don't want to label people. I think that's a subjective bias. It's a box. It's not the truth about the whole individual. And so beware. I've had people, you've heard of people that, I mean, Donald Trump is classified by a lot of people as narcissist, but I've known him for 30 years. I've actually interacted with him. So I know he's got the other side. I've seen him interacting with his family and seen him acting with his wife. I've seen him very humble and play the other side. So you don't see that on TV, and TV wants to paint a picture of somebody that's one-sided, and you'll want to get labeled that way. People can make a business off labeling people and then selling them things to treat a label. But the truth is that human beings have both sides. And one may be conscious, the other one may vacillate and it may show up at another time, or it may be buried and may be unconscious. They may be actually having an inferiority complex and covering it up with a narcissistic complex. Those labels. And so what I love doing is asking questions to help people balance out their labels within themselves, if they think they are that way, or others. See, the narcissist label or persona tends to be self-absorbed and think the self is more than other, and tend to have an elevated self-esteem, not self-worth, self-esteem, a self-righteousness, a superiority complex, right? A grandiosa, and that can go all the way from moderation, which is slight, all the way up to a point where it has a God complex, and it's omnipresent, omnipotent, and omnipotent, and omniscient, where you think you know it all, you think you are everything, you're the center of attention, you're the God complex. That's the extreme. That is a sign of an individual who is in survival and threatened and dissociating from something that's threatening them, and it's creating this persona. It's not who they are, it's the persona that they're wearing, and under different settings, they could play out the complete opposite side. And so in the Demartini method, in the breakthrough experience that I teach, I ask people to go, okay, the person comes to the program and they say, well, I have this person who's narcissistic, my father's narcissistic, or my boyfriend's narcissistic, or whatever. And I go, okay, identify what specific trait, action, inaction you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that you label that way. Whether they're self-absorbed, they always want to be right, and things of this nature. And then you go, okay, now go to a moment where and when you perceive them doing the opposite. Well, I've never seen that. Go look again. And then when they go look past their bias, past their filter, they go, ooh, you're very, very humble here, and you're very giving over here, and very humble there, and he listened very attentively there. And then they find that the other side was there, and they just blocked it out. So beware of our subjective biases and labels we put on people. It's not who they are. See, I'm an individual. I have a hierarchy of values, a set of values that are unique to me. You support my values, I can be very nice and altruistic, and very generous and kind, and all those other sides, positive, etc. But if you challenge my values, I can be mean as a tiger, nice as a pussycat, mean as a tiger, and I can get narcissistic and aggressive and all those other signs that you think that are narcissists. When I look at myself honestly, I've had both, and I play out both roles in different settings at different times. So I'm not one-sided, and neither are they. Take the time to look deeper. See, it's easy to want to label somebody and dissociate from the dynamic you're in and just blame them with a false attribution bias. They're this way, and that's why you're having this problem with them. But I found that I used to have patients come in and people say, man, I just can't deal with that person. And then I find out what their values are, and talk in those values, and out comes this other side. And they don't do that. They're just projecting their values onto them, and they're challenging them. And whenever you challenge people, the narcissistic side comes out. When you support somebody, the altruistic side comes out. If I care enough about that individual to find out what their values are and care enough to communicate what I want in terms of their values, I can get the other side. So beware of the labels, because that's not the whole individual. The whole individual is somebody worth loving. The narcissistic persona and the altruistic personas are just parts, and they're not the whole being. So beware of those labels, because when you're challenged, you tend to get narcissistic. You tend to want to fight back. When you get your sympathetic nervous system, you get testosterone, you tend to be self-absorbed that way to fight back. But if you get supported, you tend to get altruistic, and you get estrogen, you tend to be the other side. So don't label people. That's not the truth about human beings. And I know that I've seen it. I've seen diagnosis. Even in the fields of psychology, the diagnostic systems are varied. Most people see narcissism as a spectrum from moderation to extreme. And I'm agreeing. When you're in a situation where you're really, really challenged, you can get very narcissistic. I can. And when you get really, really supported, I can get really altruistic and sacrifice for people. I play both sides. And so do the people, if you look carefully at them. So when I see people going through a divorce and I see them both labeling them and paying lawyers to fit those labels and psychologists do it, those people are just taking advantage of those misinterpretations and subjective biases in those moments when they're fighting in many cases. And then 5 years later, they don't label them that way because you're getting along with them again. And for 10 years in the marriage, they didn't label them that way. They get along with them. When you communicate effectively in people's values, you get the whole individual. But if you sit and challenge them, you'll get the narcissistic side come out of them. When you support them, you get the altruistic side. I mean, think about it. If all of a sudden you came home and you said, Dad, I've got honor roll this year, and I've got Miss Prom Queen, and I've got president of the social body of the school, and I've got a scholarship to this great Ivy League school and everything else. Can I borrow the car? Your dad will say yes, absolutely. I'm proud of you, right? He'll say yes. But if you go in and say, hey, Dad, I'm pregnant and I don't know who it was, and I was doing drugs last night and I stole your car and I used your credit card and the police are after you, can I borrow the car again? You'll go, no. And you'll be really belligerent and you'll be narcissistic on them, and you'll start demanding and controlling. When people feel that they're very, very challenged, that narcissistic side comes out, and it's necessary. You need a bit of it. You need a balance of altruism and narcissism. You need, ultimately, both. In fact, when the second you get proud, we have a licensing effect inside us that automatically gives ourselves permission to do something we're ashamed of. If we go out and work out really strong and really work out and get in shape like I did this morning, and then all of a sudden you give yourself permission to overeat or drink or maybe eat chocolate or something like that at night, anytime you do something that gives you credit, that you're proud of, you automatically give yourself permission to do something you take blame for and that you're ashamed of. That's a licensing effect. And that's going on inside the psyche on the person that's a narcissist and the altruist. There's no one-sided individual. Now, if you are conscious of one and unconscious of the other, and you label them, well, then that's your subjective bias. But if you come fully conscious and ask the question, the quality of your life is based on the questions you ask, where is the other side of that individual, and balance out your perception, you'll calm yourself down, you'll treat them differently, you'll interact with them differently, and you'll discover they have a different action. Watch out for labels, because they're not. Because I found that the people that are very narcissistic, I know an individual that was labeled narcissistic by a whole lot of people. And I saw that individual meet somebody that they were humbled to and admiring and looking up to. And I watched their altruistic behavior come out relative to them, because now they're perceiving it. But they were perceiving themselves maybe more superior and too proud to admit what they see in others inside themselves relative to the people that were labeling them. So beware of the labels. The reality is that human beings have both sides. And if we can see both sides, we can bring it out. I've learned out when you love people for who they are, they turn into who you love. If you love them for both sides, you get both sides. If you actually label somebody and you then challenge them and label them and put them down, they're going to get more sympathetic activation, more arrogant in the process, and you're going to end up finding out that you just now created your belief system. Why is it to go and find out where the other side is and not react? That lady that I met that I thought was all, self-absorbed and narcissistic turned out to be one of the most philanthropic ladies, most very generous ladies and giving ladies and caring ladies. And I got to know her over time. You know, don't let that first impression of that facade that you get interfere with getting to know individuals. When you actually are infatuated with people and put them on a pedestal, you're blind to the downside. When you resent people and put them in the pit, you're blind to the upside. When you get to love somebody, you get to see both sides. And watch out for labels, because it means you're only seeing one side of the individual. Every narcissistic tendency, there's an altruistic tendency. Look carefully. Even in the reality, I've seen in the business world, I've seen when people are entrepreneurs and they learn to delegate things and hire people and extract surplus labor value out of it and make profits, if they get more than above the average in society and become wealthy, they also wake up sometimes philanthropic activities. And the person that's now below, and there seems to be altruistic and sacrificing for the company, they end up becoming more social welfare oriented, and they think, well, people owe them something. So the conscious side maybe look altruistic, but then there's an unconscious side that says, I deserve, and I'm entitled, and you owe me something. And the narcissistic side that you think is there, that's conscious, has an unconscious side that's philanthropic, that's trying to make a contribution. So don't be fooled by facades and labels. Look for both sides. And you will find out that the labels and diagnostic labels that people put are usually signs of subjective bias and ignorance on the people's parts who are diagnosing them. They're choosing and selecting only part of the equation. And so I find out when you treat people that way, you get that outcome. When you actually, and by the way, if you try to run away from those people, you run into those same people again, because it's your button that you're dealing with, your own subjective bias, and you keep running into those people. That's why you see people keep attracting these narcissists, as they label them, because they're not owning where it is. If you take the time to go in there and look at where you're pointing a finger at them and where you're doing the same thing inside your life, that's what's usually going on. When two people are in a battle in the divorce process, this person over here is labeling that person narcissist. This person there is labeling that person narcissistic. They're both trying to get what they want and both thinking about themselves. And instead of going for a sustainable fair exchange, all symptoms in our life, in our social life, in our business life, our financial life, in all areas of our life, are trying to get us authentic and to try to create a sustainable fair exchange where narcissism and altruism are brought into equilibrium. That state of equanimity, that state of equity, that's the state where power is. So be aware of the lies you make in yourself about a narcissist or an altruist. There aren't anybody. I found out people that think they're altruist have a hidden agenda, and they may not admit it, but it's unconscious, but it's there, and I can uncover it and show it and reveal it. It's either compensation for guilt of the past or a hidden agenda of the future. And just like narcissism, it's compensation for the past, pride of the past, and a hidden agenda, philanthropic agenda. So don't be fooled by facades. Look carefully for both sides, find both sides, and learn to love people. And realize that whatever we judge in others, we have within ourselves. Find it in yourself. Go to the moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating the same thing you perceive in them, and you'll find out that the fingers out there are pointing back at you, and you're also doing the same. And you have both sides just like they do. When you can see that in you and you can see that in them, you liberate yourself from a lot of burden, and you also learn how to manage the state, because when you love people for who they are, they turn into who you love. So I just want to take a moment on that. That's why I tell people to come to the breakthrough experience. I teach people how to discern those distinctions, how to neutralize the perceptions, how to own the traits, how to stop the labels, how to love people, and watch the transformation in the dynamics of people around you the moment you change the dynamics within you. That's why I tell people come to the breakthrough experience, because it's a very powerful, eye-opening, trajectory-changing experience for 2 days on how to deal with people and yourself, how to love yourself and others more profoundly, because that's going to help you in all areas of life. It's going to help you in your mental powers, because you're going to have less noise in the brain from all the judgments. It's going to help you in your business, because you're going to treat people more as equals instead of labeling people. You're going to learn how to help yourself financially, because when you do, you're more likely to be poised and present and less emotional with vicissitudes of volatility. You're going to be more stable in your relationship, because people don't want to be labeled, they want to be loved. And when you're in social settings, the same thing there. Beware of those labels. I see this all over the place. I see people labeling these people absolute evil. No, they're not. They're human beings. They're raising families. They love. So beware of the labels. And I see that affecting health. People that label people are stuck in health issues, and they're definitely not inspired. Every time you judge, you block your inspiration. Every time you love, you liberate it. So come to the breakthrough experience. Let me show you how to love the things you thought were unlovable. And that includes you and all the things you're judging in yourself. Because I guarantee you, nobody on the outside are you judging that's not also representing parts of you on the inside. So I just want to share a moment on this so-called narcissistic idea, the truth of narcissism or altruism, and realize they're inseparable. The true you has a combination of both, and you deserve to be loved for both. And both are serving as feedback mechanisms to help you become authentic and live with sustainable, fair exchange where you maximize your potential in life. So I'll see you at the breakthrough experience. Thank you for joining me today. See you next week.